Okay, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you all coming to listen to this. It's, these are called life stories, but what you're gonna hear today is just a small segment of my life. Because if I were to go longer, you'd all go to sleep. And I'm concentrating on my trucking years, and half of those, what I'm covering this afternoon, will be about 10 years of my trucking experience. And that's gonna be about when I was in the freight end of the business. Now, you all know North American, and most people, first thing they think of when they hear North American is moving. But they also had a freight division, and that's where I started it, in the freight division. Eventually I ended up in moving, but that's another story. I'm just gonna talk about freight today, and some of the particulars of it. In 1980, I was working as an industrial engineer in machine shops and foundries. I became a little disenchanted with my job and started looking around for another place to work. The office politics was really too much for me. And at that point I said, you know, I've always wanted to drive a truck, so why don't I do that? And I shopped around, and really, in order to get a job, you had to have experience. No one would hire you without experience. So I did some investigating, and I found out there were two companies, North American and Mayflower, that would train you and get you started. So I said, well, I got the brochures from both companies, and North American put out a nicer brochure, so that's where I went. I don't know that it would have been much different with Mayflower, but I picked North American because of the way their brochure was. So I decided that I would try that. Now, like I said, I had been an engineer, and I didn't know if I could do the driving, actually. I've always loved to drive, but doing this, we're gonna have to be traveling 500 miles a day, every day, except when you're loading or unloading. And I thought, I don't know, that's a lot of driving. It's a lot of driving. In fact, I ended up running just over 100,000 miles a year, every year. So it added up pretty quickly. After 10 years, you've got about 1 million miles behind you. And you're through probably 2 or 3 trucks, because they do wear out. I was able to get between 300,000 and 400,000 on the truck before I traded it in for a newer one. The program that North American had was, you had to put a $6,000 down payment on the truck, or the tractor portion. They would supply trailers, so you didn't have to worry about the trailer. So I got the money and signed up, and went out to, flew out to Fort Wayne, Indiana for 2 weeks of training. There were about 12 of us in the group that I was in, and they split us up into 2 groups, 6 in each. One group would train on paperwork in the morning, while the other group was driving trucks around their track that they had there, and learning how to back up the trucks, and learning how to shift a little, but they wouldn't let us go too fast on the track. They kept us first and second gear only. But it gave you the experience of at least driving, getting the feel for what it was gonna be like. One of the interesting things about the 12 students that were in my group when I was out there, most of them had just received their last unemployment check. So when the checks run out, they decided it was time to find a job. I wasn't in that situation. I had quit a job. So, what we did, the first week that we were there was paperwork and the driving around the track. So we had to go through a fair amount of paperwork. You had to learn how to keep logs, you had to learn how to send your paperwork in, you had to learn how you could get your advances and cash. Had what they called contracts that we used to carry. And whenever you got a load, they'd tell you how much your advance was and give you a code number. And you could get a check, take it to a truck stop, and they'd cash it for you. Of course, they called in to verify it, but that's how you got your money when you were on the road. And the paperwork, you had to learn about some of the idiosyncrasies of traveling around the country. They registered the trucks for, I think it was 46 states for all year. 2 states, Maine and Vermont, we had to get permits, trip permits each time we went to one of those states, because it was so expensive to register the equipment for a full year. So we just got trip permits. And the way we got them is when we knew we were going to one of those areas, we'd call permits, tell them where we were going, and they'd tell us where they could send the trip permit for us. So we always picked those up, and then whenever you were in Vermont, you could be sure you were going to be stopped by a state trooper at one point or another, asking if you had your trip permit. I know I got stopped several times, but I always had it. I was always prepared. Now the second week that we were there was our road trip. We went with an instructor. There were 3 students in the truck and an instructor, and we went up through Michigan to learn some real driving and real shifting. Now the shifting is interesting because they're 9-speed transmissions, and a Road Ranger transmission with 9 speeds on it. And some trucks have more than that. But what we found out was the 9 speeds, reverse being one of them, you hardly ever used first gear, because that was for real heavy loads. So we'd start in second gear, and you'd shift, just like a car, you'd shift a manual transmission 4 speeds, and then you hit a little button on the shift column, and you go through the 4 again. It brought it up into the second range. So the transmissions had 2 ranges. The hard part was learning when to shift, because you had to keep an eye on your tachometer. We had to double clutch them. It wasn't like the automatic transmissions that they have now. And trucks do have automatic transmissions now. Hardly any of them, except the older ones, have to be manually shifted and double clutched and so forth. So it's changed a lot. And this is some of the things I want to talk about today, is the changes that have gone on in the industry. When we went up through Michigan, we traveled on interstates and secondary roads, so we could get some experience on both. Experience driving through small towns, and the interstates are easy, you just go along on those. After the second week, we were assigned our trucks, our tractors, and the interesting thing that happened with mine is I couldn't get in the driver's door. It wouldn't open from outside. So I had to go around, get in through the passenger door, and then you could open it. So I reported it to the people at North American there, and they said, well, it's only a couple of miles down the street to the international dealer. Take it over there and they'll fix it for you. And that they did. But when I got there, I pulled up and they told me which door to go in. So I get back in the truck and I'm looking at the door and I'm looking at the size of the truck and I said, I hope this is gonna fit. Because I'd never driven into a garage like that before. So I said, well, the trucks have obviously gone in and out of here before, so if I line my mirror up close to the edge of the door, I'll be fine. And I did that. So I get in, pull in, jump out of the truck. The guy said, boy, he says, you should see how bad some of these drivers are that come here. He says, half of them ask us to bring the truck in for them. He thought I knew what I was doing, but I didn't. So they got that fixed so that the door was operating properly. In fact, when I got in there, they said, oh yeah, this is the one we had trouble with this morning. But they got me going. Now what North American did for all of the drivers as best they could, on your first load, they loaded you towards home. You may not get home, but you would get close enough. So sure enough, my first load was out of Indiana. From Indiana, I went to New England. I had stops in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. I was living in Massachusetts, so basically I was home. And once I got unloaded, I had some time off before I had to hit the road again. So I started out from Indiana. Now when we left Indiana, they had filled our trucks up with fuel. Both tanks were full. On the truck that I had then, there were 80-gallon tanks, so I had 160 gallons of diesel fuel. And off I went. By the time I hit Pennsylvania, I'd just done a little bit of driving in Indiana, crossed Ohio, got into Pennsylvania, and I'm looking at the fuel gauge. It's down a lot. I said, boy, I knew these things used a lot of fuel, but I'm down to a quarter of a tank already. So I said, it doesn't seem right. So I pulled into a rest area and checked the fuel tank on the driver's side, and sure enough, it was almost empty. Went over to the passenger side and looked at that one. It's full, filled right up. No one had opened up the crossover valve. So I crawled underneath and opened the valve, and sure enough, the gauge comes back up again. And I continued on my way. Now, my second load actually, I delivered that one. The second load was Milton Bradley Gaines going to Florida. And I said, oh wow, this is cool, because my brother lived in Florida, and where I delivered wasn't too far from where he lived. So I spent a couple days with him, visiting him, and then called dispatch to get my next load. The next load was refrigerators up in Kentucky. I think it was GE, was the plant. And they said, there's something wrong with this load. Dispatch told me this. I said, there's something squirrely about it, so I would suggest that you get up there early and get it. And he said, don't worry if it's, for some reason it's not there, because you will be, we'll get something else for you. This load's going out of there all the time, so don't worry about it. Well, I got up there and got the load, and sure enough, there was a problem. As I was leaving, another driver that had been in school with me came in, and he said, I'm getting a load to Oklahoma. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, that's great. I said, that may be the one I have. And sure enough, it was. So he had to get something else. From Oklahoma, I actually picked up in Oklahoma a load of bicycles coming back to the Carolinas, and I'm not sure if it was North or South Carolina, but it was for Rose's department stores. And when I pulled up at the distribution center, there was another North American driver sitting there. I went over to talk to him. I told him I had bicycles. They said, yeah, I've got bicycles too. I thought, wow, 2 truckloads of bicycles coming in. That's a lot of bicycles. So we backed in and started unloading us. We're talking to the fellow in charge of receiving. They said, gee, you guys got 2 loads of bicycles today. He says, yeah, you're number 48 and 49. That's a lot of bicycles. A lot of bicycles. And then from that, I got another load back to Massachusetts again. But basically, that's the way I bounced around the country. You never really knew where you were gonna go next. You knew what your load was, they'd tell you what it was going to be, and you would just take it there, drop it off. The nice thing about doing that was I didn't have to worry about payments or anything. North American took care of collecting the money for the loads that we delivered, and then paying us with what was left. So it worked out easy, which I enjoyed. And the other thing I enjoyed about it is you just went from one place to another. That was your job. You picked up at point A, you delivered in point B, and you were done. And you move on to the next job. And the idea was to keep the wheels turning, because you weren't making any money if you were sitting around somewhere. You only made money when you were moving. And I traveled around the 48 states. It took me 6 months to be in every state. In 6 months, I had traveled through every state of the contiguous 48. And after that, it was just repeating, just going back, and going back. But I enjoyed it. It was always interesting to see the different parts of the country. You know, going across the Great Plains was interesting. There was a place I'm not sure what state it's in now, one of the western states where the Sandhill Cranes they travel twice a year.
Texas.
Well, yeah, they go in Texas, but there was where the North Platte River was.
Nebraska.
So that was something that I would generally get to see, because they come by the thousands. It's just unbelievable how many there are. And the farmers complain about how much they eat too, because there are so many of them. Now, as I said, I'm just talking about the years that I was in the freight division, just hauling freight. At that point in time, this is just before deregulation really come into effect. There were certain products that we could haul.
Oh, God.
Box furniture was one, appliances, washers, dryers, refrigerators, TVs, things of that nature, recliners, different kinds of furniture. And occasionally, because at that point in time, North American was owned by Frito-Lay, we could carry their products because they owned us. So sometimes we'd get a load of Doritos or something, but they wouldn't let me have any. Now we had 45-foot trailers then, and that was the biggest trailer that you could have. On the East Coast, almost all trucking companies on the East Coast had cab-over tractors. Now the cab-over tractors have a straight front on them, and you're sitting up above the engine. You get a great view. You can see a long ways down the road in those. And the reason they all had that is because some of the states on the East Coast had restrictions on how long a tractor trailer could be. It was 55 feet. I had a 45-foot trailer, so that only left 10 feet for the tractor. So conventional tractors were out of the question on the East Coast. On the West Coast, there were a lot of them. And ones that stayed west of the Mississippi could be longer. But for people that were on the East Coast quite frequently, you had to have the cab overs. And at that point, all the big companies had them. That's all that North American had: Mayflower, Schneider, J.B. Hunt. All the companies had similar type tractors, because otherwise you could get in a lot of trouble. And Virginia quite frequently would stop you and check your length, make sure that you were legitimate. Now as I said, the conditions changed, and eventually what they did is they said, we'll just go by trailer length. So, and then they the trailers went from the 45 foot to the 48 foot to 51, and now they're 53. And it didn't matter how long the tractor was in front of it, which was good in many ways because, number one, the longer tractors ride better. The short little ones, the short cab overs that I had, would literally beat you to death, especially if you were on a rough road. And like I said, let's see, I had three cab overs before I got a conventional with a big sleeper on it. And then the first cab overs that I had, they had a bunk in them, and it was literally a bunk. That was all. You had to get dressed laying down. So it was a little bit awkward at times, but that was my choice. One of the cities that I came to like was Chicago, Illinois. And there's several reasons. Number one time I was at a truck stop there, just on the south side of Chicago. It was a big 76 truck stop there. I used to stop there quite frequently, and I went in for breakfast one morning, and there was a young driver sitting next to me, and I was talking to him. I said, "How do you like Chicago?" He said, "Oh, I love it." I said, "Really? Why?" I said, "There's a lot of low bridges and stuff." He says, "Yeah, but you always get a load out of here. There's freight going out of here all the time. All those low bridges are where the railroad tracks are, and they're bringing stuff in that needs to be shipped somewhere." So I said, and he was right. Anytime I got into Chicago, I never sat there more than a day. I was on my way again, which was cool. Then I had a little, I'm not sure what you'd call it, I'll tell you what happened. I had a load to deliver, and I pulled into a place, and I saw all the loading docks there, so I hopped out and went in to see where they wanted me to back in. And I said, "Oh, this is shipping. You need to go around to the west side of the building. That's where receiving is." I said, "Oh, damn, I've got to do that." I said, "I'm from New England. I don't know east from west, And the reason you don't know east from west is there's no checkerboard cities in New England. And if you're going across Connecticut on 95, you're actually traveling west to east, but it's called 95 north. And then when you get to Boston, as you're on 95, before you get into the city, there's two signs there. It says 95 north this way, 93 north this way. So you have no, from New England, you have no feel for east or west. It's pretty confusing. So I decided that at first I was a little upset that I had to move the truck, and I'm thinking, "Hey, stupid, this is what you wanted to do." So I did it and went on from there. Then another time in that same truck stop in Chicago, I was sitting there overnight. Now, we ran our engines at night to keep warm. That was the primary reason we ran them. The second reason that we ran them was because the big diesel engines hold 11 gallons of oil. If it gets cold and starts to get thick, it's almost impossible to start the truck the next day. You've got to have a block heater on it in cold weather so that you can plug in somewhere. So I was having a hard time sleeping in the truck with the engine running because it had been ingrained into me for years that you don't sleep in a car with the engine running because you're going to become asphyxiated. The trucks are a little different. They're diesel fuel, and the exhaust isn't hazardous, or maybe hazardous to your health, but you could sleep through it and you won't die from it. But I was having trouble sleeping, and I'm sitting in the truck stop reading a book, and the truck next to me holds up some wild turkey, a bottle of wild turkey, and says, "Come on over." So I went over, and he had some cans of soda there, so we'd take turns with the wild turkey and follow with the soda. The real reason he wanted me over there, I think, is he was looking for a husband for his daughter. He kept showing me pictures of his daughter and 3 children. So, what a nice girl she is. She'd make a good wife, but I said, no, I'm not really interested in that. I have a wife. So I felt pretty good by the time I got out of the tractor and went back to mine. I crawled into the bunk and I slept like a baby. That was it. And after that, I had no problem sleeping. I got over my fear. Oh yeah. In Chicago, there are a lot of low bridges because of the railroads coming in from different directions. And some of the bridges are 8, 9, 10 feet clearance. Well, the trailers we were pulling were 13.6, so you couldn't get through those. You had to, I would always call ahead and get directions, but I also found out that at the truck stop, you could buy a map of Chicago that had every bridge marked on it. So you knew what the clearance was. And they were also color coded. The green ones were 13.6, no problem. They had yellow and red that were lower, so I just watched for the green ones. I worked my way in to the green ones. And speaking of heights of trailers, New York posts their bridge height a foot less than what they actually are. And one time I was coming out of Vermont and headed over to New York and come up to the bridge that went over there, and it said 12.6. I said, oh, shoot, I'm a foot higher than that. So I pulled off to the side, and you could see where a lot of people have pulled off there. And I had my CB on. Someone comes on and says, "What are you waiting for, North American?" I said, "Well," I said, the bridge is posted at 12.6, and I got a 13.6 trailer. He said, "Oh, no problem." I said, "What do you mean, no problem?" He said, "That's off by a foot. Come on over." Okay, and you wonder why truck drivers from New York get caught under bridges. Because they think it's higher than it's posted. Oh yeah, and another thing a couple more things that happened in Chicago. I had a delivery for Bloomingdale's. Now in Chicago, trucks can't run the major north-south arteries for more than a block. You have to work your way around. So I had a shipment going to Bloomingdale's, and before I got there, dispatch had told me, when you get there, you've got to slide the wheels on your trailer all the way up towards the front, because it's a real tight ramp. It's a circular ramp that you go down to get to where the receiving dock was. So I said, okay, I did that, and they said, well, have someone directing you. And sure enough, there was a guy walking in front of me, telling me to come and turn a little this way, turn a little that way, till I get down to where the receiving docks are. At the receiving docks, they had a turntable, and you pulled onto the turntable, except the turntable was old, and in order to get everything on there, you had to jack your tractor around to get the tractor wheels on as well as the trailer wheels, and then they spun you around to where you were going, and you backed in. I was on the last spot there, and the driver that was in the next to last spot came over and said, would you like me to move my tractor out of the way so that you'll have more room to get in there? I said, of course. So he did. He unhooked and got out of the way so I could back in. Then, once I was empty, coming out again, there was someone in front of me directing me to make sure that I didn't hit the walls or anything. And he said, now when you get up so that you're on the sidewalk up there, stop. Don't go any further. He said, I'm gonna go back and pull the pin on your trailer wheels and I want you to slide them all the way back. I said, really? Why is that? He said, well, if we leave them up where they are, the top of the trailer will take out the heating system. So by sliding them back, the trailer went down as we were coming up, and out I went. So you never knew what you were gonna run into, or what could happen there. So it was an interesting life. When I first started, like I said, I started in 1980, and I was just the beginning, it was really just the beginning of the deregulation in the trucking industry. That came on later, but we had to get permits from various states. Some of them were 2-inch square, and you'd put them on the doors on the tractor. Some of them were smaller, and they had what they call a bingo plate that was on the front bumper, and you put the little ones on that wherever they were supposed to be. Now, fortunately, that changed later in the 80s. We got what they called an IFTA sticker, and that was the International Fuel Tax Association. So that what happened after that is you could buy fuel in any state. Prior to the IFTAs, you had to buy fuel in every state that you went through, so that you would pay your fair share of tax for the roads in each state. But then they combined it all and put these new stickers on, so that you didn't have to get them for each state anymore. Before that transpired, Arkansas was one of the states that would stop you every time you were got near the border, to make sure that you could buy your fair share of fuel. So they had an extra page on the receipts that you would drop off as you were at the last way station. Well, one day I realized I was getting close to the border, and I said, geez, I haven't bought any fuel yet. And sure enough, a fuel stop came right up, and I went in and got my fuel, and go out and hop back in the truck, and you could practically see the way station down the street. So I went down there, and they told me to pull over and bring in the fuel receipt, so I did. And as I'm walking over, I'm going, oh damn, I don't have the extra sheet. So I went in, and I said, I didn't get the extra sheet. I'm sorry, I got fuel. He says, yeah. He says, I know. He said, I was coming into work, I saw you at that fuel stop back there, and I knew it wasn't the right one. So I said, okay, what do I do now? Go find the right place and buy some more? He said, no. He said, I'm gonna let you go. He said, the next time you come through here, buy a little extra fuel each time, and that'll make up for it. I said, okay. Sometimes they were good to you. One time in California, I got stopped at a way station. They come out and checked my brakes. Now the truck's got 10 brakes. Unfortunately, 2 of mine were off a little, needed to be adjusted. So the guys there were nice. They said, you can use my creeper. He said, you can crawl under there, and adjust the brakes. It only takes a few minutes. So I did that, and then I go in, and they asked me if I wanted some coffee. Yeah, take a cup of coffee. I said to him afterwards, I said, how much is this coffee gonna cost me? He said, we don't know. We just turned in the paperwork. Lo and behold, it was $75. So you never know. And the truck stops changed quite a bit too. When I first started driving, I used to have to get 60 gallons of fuel to cross Pennsylvania, and there was a fuel stop that I used to go to quite regularly. And the pumps were pretty slow, because I'd get 60 gallons of fuel, and while they were pumping the 60 gallons of fuel, I had my stuff all set up, my gear all set. I would run in, get a shower, and come back out, and they'd just be finishing up so I could pay for my fuel. So they were slow pumps then. They went from the Flying J pumped about 50 gallons a minute. And once they made that change, that you could buy your fuel anywhere, you could go in, and not only did they pump 50 gallons a minute, they had two pumps, one on either side. There was a pump that kept track of how much fuel you got, and the other one was a slave pump, and so it was all put on the same ticket. And you could put the nozzles in, I'd hop back up in the cab to write down where I was, how much the fuel was, and how much I was getting. By the time I did that, they would have clicked off, the tanks were full, and I'd be on my way from there. It's just amazing how things changed over the years. Another thing that changed was showers. The bigger truck stops had nice showers. 76 and Truck Stops of America had nice showers, but it was a shower room. It was 3 stalls, and there was really no privacy there, but that wasn't a major concern of mine. I wanted to get clean. But what happened, and I think Flying J was the one that really started the difference in showers. They had shower rooms, which was basically like your bathroom at home. They had a sink in there, they had a toilet, and they had the shower, and you could lock the door. So you were set. And if you bought fuel at that particular truck stop, the showers were free. And if you hadn't bought fuel, then you had to pay, I think it's $10 to take a shower. But I was always buying fuel, so it was no problem. So, now because I had already said that the 2 big truck stops across the country, and they went from sea to sea, were 76 and Truck Stops of America. For some reason, and I don't know why, but for some reason in the early 90s, the 76 truck stops quit being truck stops. They just folded everything up. Truck Stops of America took over most of their locations, not all of them, but a lot of them. And also I need to tell you the difference between a truck stop and a fuel stop. The Flying J's were primarily fuel stops, Flying J and Pilot, and those 2 have combined. They're fuel stops. They don't have any service, can't get your truck serviced there. The 76s, good, they had service bays, and you could get your oil changes and minor repairs taken care of there. So that changed so that you don't have that. And also the 76s and Truck Stops of America had decent restaurants. And the newer truck stops, the restaurants weren't as good. In fact, right now, and I think even Truck Stops of America has gone to fast food. They don't have a nice sit-down restaurant anymore like they used to have, which is kind of a shame in a way. But, and in their defense, the drivers changed too. After deregulation and they were able to get bigger tractors, the newer tractors have inverters in them. So the drivers all microwave their lunches and they get their hot coffee and heat up coffee in the truck. So they don't use the facilities that they used to. So that's another change that's gone on. When I first started driving, I dressed like the typical truck driver, sneakers and dungarees. That didn't last very long. Dungarees were not comfortable for me, and it took forever to dry them. We'd be go into a truck stop and run a load of laundry. Everything would be dry but your dungarees. And I said, this isn't gonna cut it. That's not good. So I changed into more conventional clothes. And a lot of truck drivers now wear shorts and flip-flops, but to me, that's kinda crazy, but they do it. And, one of the reasons I changed my dress code, if you will, is I used to go through Nashville a lot. There's two interstates that go right through Nashville. One is 65 that runs north and south, and the other one is 40 that runs east and west. And right in practically the heart of the city, there was a huge truck stop there. It was a Truck Stops of America, nice big one. And across the street from that was the Salvation Army. So I would go over there, and it was a big Salvation Army. I could pick up all the shirts and pants I wanted for next to nothing. So that's what I did. I'd go over there, and every time I went through, I'd pick up 2 or 3 pairs of pants, a couple of shirts, and was on my way again. Now, I mentioned before that what I'm talking about right now is just the freight division of North America. Eventually, I moved into the moving business, and that would be another whole story. There's a lot of tales to tell about moving. And initially, I was very happy in the freight division. However, after I swapped over from freight to household moving, North American decided that they couldn't control their freight drivers well enough. They were owner-operators, and they would turn down loads from time to time. So they said, we're gonna do away with owner-operators. We're gonna hire drivers. We'll hire drivers that won't be owner-operators. Well, they did that. And one time I was in Fort Wayne having some work done on my tractor, having it serviced. And I asked the mechanic, I said, how are things going now that they've changed, no more owner-operators? He said, oh man. He said, we're changing engines daily. He said, it just isn't working. And just because they were company drivers didn't make them any more cooperative than the owner-operators were. So eventually they phased that out completely. The freight division went away. And they had a bunch of trailers for sale all across the country because I think they had 3,000 trailers and no use for them. I still got some time. Back in the 80s, there were quite a few selections or choices for large trucks. There was General Motors, who had two divisions. There was GMC and Chevy. There was Ford, International Harvester, Mack, Volvo, Marmon, Broadway, Autocar, Peterbilt, and Kenworth, Freightliner, and White, which had been part of Freightliner at one time. Today, we're down to basically International Harbor, Mack, Volvo, Brockway I think still makes a few, and Autocar makes a few, Peterbilt and Kenworth and Freightliner. So it has consolidated quite a bit as to what's available. Now everyone tends to think that the Peterbilt and the Kenworth are the best trucks you can buy. They're the most expensive trucks you can buy. But I don't know that there's a lot of difference between those and an International or a Freightliner, because all the trucks have the same engines. There's just a few diesel manufacturers, Cummins, Caterpillar, and General Motors, Detroit diesels. So basically, they've all got the same engine, the same transmissions, same rear ends. The only thing that's different is the skin on them. You could pay a lot more money for the expensive ones. Now they may have a few more bells and whistles, but it's not a lot of difference in the trucks. Oh yeah, one of the crazy things that truck drivers do, not all of them I'm sure, but a lot, is if you're on the New Jersey Turnpike, you go by Newark Airport, and there's a lot of planes coming and going through there. And quite often, you'll see the trucks sliding over to the slow lane and slowing down. They're watching the planes coming and going. You know where our minds are, or were. Now, I spoke a little bit about engines, and the first engine I had was like a 290 horsepower. Back then, the speed limit was 55, and you didn't need an engine bigger than that, really. Then that small engine got 5.5 miles per gallon, so it sucked up a lot of fuel. The last engine that I had was a Caterpillar 425 horsepower engine. That got 8 miles to the gallon. It changed that much over almost 20 years. And the nice thing about the bigger engine was when you were merging into traffic on the interstates, you could be up to the speed limit real quick. So it was much easier to get in. And speaking of merging into traffic, Pennsylvania on their interstates has a habit of putting stop signs at the end of as you come down to get on the highway. So you have to start from 0 and then try to blend in with traffic. It's not easy. I'm afraid I ran a few of those stop signs. It just didn't make any sense at all. And a typical day, and like I got used to driving the 500 miles a day. The speed limit at that point was only 55, so you couldn't get much more than 500 miles in a day. Speed limits now are 65 and 70, so in a 10-hour workday, you can get a little further than the 500 miles, get a few more miles out of it. So driving has changed. The other thing about driving now, as I mentioned, the automatic transmissions. You don't have to worry about double clutching, you don't have to worry about hitting the right gear and everything, and checking your tach to see just where you are to make sure that you're in the right range to have it work good. So on a typical day, there was 2 types of days. One was when you were traveling, and I generally get up around 6 o'clock in the morning, go in, have my breakfast and coffee, get a cup of coffee to go, and start driving. And then I would have a quick lunch. When I stopped for lunch, it was never for very long because I wanted to get my day done. And then I'd drive the rest of the day until supper time or thereabouts. And then I'd stop after supper, I'd read for a little while. I always had books with me. And then I'd go to bed, crawl into the bunk and sleep. And then get up the next day and do the same thing again. Now, other days, when I was delivering or picking up, I'd have to go somewhere to either shipping or receiving, and either get a load or drop a load off. Some places were great to go to, others were terrible. There was a warehouse in New Jersey, it's called Great G, and I used to hate going in there because you did an appointment 7:30. Well, they told everybody 7:30. You get there at 7:30, there's 15 trucks lined up. I couldn't split it up a little so that you had an opportunity, you know. So you had to wait in line and eventually get in. And I've got some numbers here on truck sales. These are older numbers. This is from 2015. That was the most recent I could find. The Freightliner is the #1 truck that year. Freightliner was the #1 selling truck in the United States. they had 40% of the market, which is huge. Kenworth and Peterbilt were next with 14% and 13%. International had 11%, and Volvo has 10% of the market. Now, traveling up and down the East Coast, you see a lot of Volvos, and I was surprised that their percentage was as small as it is. But I think they must not sell many out west, because going up and down the East Coast, basically you see three trucks. You see Freightliners, Internationals, and Volvos. But I was surprised at how little market they had. I got 2 more minutes here. Sometimes we didn't know, us drivers, you know, we think we're the smartest people in the world. We know everything. So we're always complaining about dispatch screwing up and not doing things right. One time I picked up a load in, there were 3 of us, picked up a load in New Jersey, and it was going to just north of Chicago, Waukegan, Illinois, and this was for Kohl's. They had a distribution center there. So we picked the loads up. I told all 3 of us, I said, no, that's gotta be here, gotta be in there 7:30 on Friday morning. I said, really? That's gonna have to do some hot pedaling here to get that there. So I got going, and I got to thinking about it. So I called Kohl's. I said, I was told I have to be there at 7:30. Is that a fact? I said, oh no, as long as you're here by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're all set. And I said, wow, great. So I took a nap. So I got a little sleep in, and Friday morning at 7 o'clock, I was in Indiana. I stopped at a service plaza to call in. We were supposed to call in every day. I don't know where we were. So I called in. I no more than put the phone back in the receiver when it started ringing. I said, uh-oh. So I answered. I said, you're supposed to be in Illinois. Where are you? I'm in Indiana. I said, you were supposed to be in Illinois at 7 o'clock this morning. I said, no. I called the receiver. They said, as long as I got there by 3 o'clock, I'm okay. She said, really? Well, get over there as quick as you can. I said, yeah, I will. So about noontime, I pulled in, dropped my trailer, and the other 2 North American drivers are sitting there in the tractors. They had dropped their trailers. And I said, how come you're still here? He said, they don't have any empty trailers for us. I said, really? No empties? So I called dispatch and I said, told them, no empty trailers. He said, well, won't they unload yours? I said, no. They told me they're not touching mine today. It'll be next week before they touch it. She said, well, I want you to wait around. So why don't you just send us up to Wisconsin? There's a place up there that you're running trucks out of there, half a dozen a day. So why don't we go up there? Oh no, can't do that. You've got to take a trailer up. I said, we don't have any trailers. They said, well, why don't you stay there in case I get one unloaded till 3 o'clock. So at 3 o'clock I called in and said, okay, what now? Go to Wisconsin. They didn't believe us. And then another interesting trip I had that I felt that dispatch had screwed up a little on it. It was, I picked up a load in New England, and there was 3 stops on it. It was going to, supposed to go to Wheeling, West Virginia first from New England, go to Wheeling, West Virginia, then go back across Pennsylvania to Harrisburg and drop off some there, and then go back to Ohio. I said, this is crazy. Number one, I'm not going across Pennsylvania that many times. It's a rough road, very rough road. Interstate 80 across Pennsylvania. One of the drivers said that road was designed and built by a German engineer who had mastered the art of pouring the cement with the smooth side down. And it was about that rough. So I started out and I got into Pennsylvania and I called what was supposed to be my second stop. I said, I've got some freight here for you, could I drop it off today? And they said, yeah, I can do that. I said, the only problem is this, I've got 2 pallets on the back that you'll have to take out and put back on after you get your stuff. I said, that's no problem. Doesn't take them long with the forklift to yank 2 off and put them back on. So I got that load off and we put the 2 pallets back on and I headed over for Wheeling, West Virginia. When I got there, I said, you know, they told me this was a hot load and I had to be here quickly. I said, what the heck is it? He said, wait a minute. He said, I'll pull a pallet off and see. Pulls a pallet off and says, oh, it's the circulars for next week's newspaper. I said, really? Okay. So then I went on into Ohio and got rid of that load. But funny things happen.
That's good.
So I think I might have a little teeny bit more. Nope. Oh yeah, one other, what I think is an interesting little fact, is the circumference of the world is 25,000 miles. Now, we were driving over 100,000 miles a year, so that was equivalent to traveling around the world 4 times. So it's quite a trip. So now, are there any questions? They're everywhere.
Tell me about some weather problems you might have had, because I've lived in North Dakota a lot, and I've seen a lot of semis in deep
Yes.
trouble in blizzards.
Yes, in fact, that almost happened to me one time. I was going across there and
Talk about weather problems.
ran into some black ice. And the tractor started swinging around and I thought, oh geez, I'm gonna end up in the median. Well, I said, may as well try. So I started spinning the wheel in the other direction and it went around to the other side. Well, I'm not much better off. So I tried it again. That time I noticed it didn't swing quite as far. And I brought it back again and then eventually it straightened out. But boy, it scared me. I really thought I was gonna end up in the median. Who else?
Were there
Martha?
any lady drivers?
Oh,
That was my
Yeah.
question.
there weren't too many in 1980, but, there are a lot now, a lot of them. And one of the reasons I'm sure is the automatic transmissions. You know, basically, all you've gotta do is sit there and steer, yes,
Second question, did your wife travel with you
yes,
all the time, most of the time, or what are we talking about?
quite a bit. The first couple of years, I was all by myself. And then she came with me, and then when we got into household, she would do the inventory, and I would do the loading. But she wouldn't drive. No, that was the old wife. Yeah, she's the new wife back there. Yes, Frank?
Did you ever stop at the I-80 truck stop in Iowa, or was that?
Yes.
Gone then?
Oh, yes, that's a nice truck stop.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, they have good food.
I know.
Yeah, I did stop there. In fact, I probably stopped in about every truck stop in the country at one time or another.
Yeah.
In fact, in Florida one time, it was again after I got into household. I stopped at a place in, the agency, I asked them if they had showers, and they said, yeah, but we don't have hot water. I said, it's Florida, I think I'll try it.
You were an owner-operator?
Yes.
Meaning you owned the truck,
Right.
and did they help you sell it, or how?
Oh, I traded it in through North American. In fact, I probably shouldn't admit this, but, one of my tractors, the second tractor, developed some kind of a leak. And they could never find the problem, but I would end up with more oil than I started out with. So diesel fuel was somehow getting into the oil. So I had it into North American Surface several times. And the last time I went in, he said to me, he said, "Do you plan to keep this?" I said, "No, really not." He said, "If I were you, I'd trade it now." So I got it cleaned up and, put a fresh oil change on it, took it in and traded it. Yes.
What was your, CB handle when you were trucking?
Oh, Dreamer,
Dreamer?
yeah.
Would you consider yourself to be a friendly driver to the cars
Oh, yeah.
and warn them about the police being just up ahead or behind? and
No,
things like
well, I did sometimes,
that? Yeah.
not all the time, but once in a while I would. Figured if cars are speeding, they shouldn't be. Yes,
What was the cost of your tractor?
the first one was 60,000.
Yeah, over 100.
The second one, I don't remember what it was, honestly. It was it was more money. And the third one was even more money. The fourth tractor that I bought, the first three I bought new. The fourth one I, bought used. It had been working with a van line and it was in great shape. And it had the big sleeper so that you could stand up to get dressed. And it had a queen size bed on the bottom and then there was a bunk up above that. So it was nice, very nice. And it was a conventional, which means it had the nose out in front of it. Personally, I prefer the cab overs because they're a little taller, a little higher, and, you can see more. You can see further down the road with those. Jake?
Were there certain hours that you drove, or was it almost any hour of the day?
It was almost any hour. One night I had picked up a load of, windshields going to an automobile factory not very far away. It was I picked up in Indiana and went over into Ohio with them. Well, I didn't get loaded till midnight. And there were a whole bunch of trucks in this big parking lot, and I said, "Put your CB on and we'll call you when it's your turn." So I did that, and they called me and said, "Okay, back up into door number 3. I said, "Fine." So I count the doors. I called them back, I said, "There's a truck in number 3. It's already a truck there. I said, "Oh, we don't count door number 1. Okay, sure enough, there was an opening. Sometimes you'd scratch your head and say, anybody else?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Were you required to be a Teamster? And if you were, how did that work?
We weren't required to be a Teamster, but I did join the Teamsters when I first started. And the reason I joined the Teamsters was I said, if you go to a receiving or shipping area that's all union, you'll need to be a Teamster to get loaded or unloaded. So I said, okay, so I was a Teamster for a couple of years, but I found out that I really wasn't getting anything for the dues that I was paying. I wasn't a full-fledged member of Teamsters. So when they went up on the dues, I opted out. You could do that. And I did. And I never had any problems. Not at all.
Were you limited to the number of hours you could drive a day?
Yes, yeah. You can drive 10 hours a day for 7 days in a row. At that point, you have to take a day off, which for an over-the-road truck driver, that's not a good deal because you sit around the truck stop for a day and then you can start up again. But if you drive 8.5 hours, you can continue there's no, you don't hit the 70-hour limit, so you can just keep going. So that's what I used to do, I logged 8.5 hours every day. Sometimes I might go a little further, but you can't do that anymore because they have electronic logs now. The paper logs were handy, creative.
2 sets of books.
Any other questions? Well, I hope you enjoyed this.
Yes,
Mhm.
very much.
What you need to do now is talk to Janet. Cause she's got quite a story about the time that she went with me. It was a very interesting trip.
Remember you.
Well, I got my permit.
Very good.
Permit, and I drove.
I'll turn it off.